Masterclass counter without counter, right? All right, so the purpose of counter, right, is the ability to counter more often than not a counter attack versus counter play. Yes, you can counter a counter play, but typically you want to counter a counter attack. So a negate basically, right? The negates an attack. So because more likely you're trying to go for game. If you're like me, you tend to get your opponent down to 2 or 1 life, relatively easy, and you want to finish off the game, which is the goal. The goal is to, right, finish off the game. So the things you have to deal with, the obstacles you have to overcome in order to win the game, right, to deal the last 2 damage, 2 to 1 damage, is blockers, which is not too hard to do. Negates, since there are free negates, it gets a little bit harder. Typically, you wait for your opponent to be tapped out and then take advantage of that, because that tends to reduce the ability for them to be able to play a negate because they don't have the energy for it, right? So tapped out is what you're looking for. It's part of the perfect storm, as they say. But then the last barrier, right, the last step will be combo power, right? Your opponent's ability to out combo your attack. Usually, the way you try to overcome this is by having a whole bunch of cards in your hands, right? Having a bigger hand size than your opponent to increase your chances of comboing, out comboing their attack. Well, making sure they can't out combo your attack is what I meant to say. But a lot of times that might not be possible. Maybe because hand control is a factor. Maybe your deck doesn't draw as fast as your opponent. Maybe your opponent draws faster, so your opponent has like a 30 plus hand size versus, let's say you have a 20 card hand size. That's pretty big, but they have a 30 card hand size, so they still, they have the hand card advantage. So even though you make sure they have no blockers, let's say they don't have no free negates, no, right? So right now you're dealing with a 10, a 10 card difference in hand size, and then there's super combos. Sorry, and most super combos, especially the older ones, can draw cards, so that adds more to their hand size, so they can go beyond 30 if they have super combos, right? So because of that, it's going to be really, really hard to get your attack to go through. You're going to try to need multiple attacks, because you just need something to get through, right? But in that type of situation, it's like, that's why you want to do your best to try to reduce your opponent's hand size as much as possible. Stuff like turning the tides at 1 But for the situations where things are going good, ideally, your opponent doesn't have that big of a hand size, or your hand size are relatively even, or let's say your hand size is bigger than your opponent's hand size. So when it comes to comboing, you have a higher chance, but they might have a free negate, right? So in that type of situation, most free negates, like sparking negates and the blocker negates, they have the condition where you have to take a life in order to play them for free, right? And ideally, you want to make sure you're in a position where they have to play it that way. They have to take a life to play. So that's the ideal situation you want to be in. So to make it where sparking negate or a blocker negate or anything similar that has to take a life in order to be useful, you want to typically you want to use the counter just to negate a negate, right? Whether it be a free negate or a negate that they actually paid for. But a pseudo counter, which is the idea of this video, is the idea of playing something that says when your opponent plays a counter skill, deal them a damage, right? They're already in kill range, right? They're already low life. They're already at 2 life. Let's say they're at 2 life. They're already at 2 life, ideally, right? Preferably you want them to be at 1 life, because that definitely will make it where they're definitely not going to really do much of anything. But ideally, it's 2 or less, right? So let's say they have 2 life. So if they were to use those free negates where they have to take a life, they're taking a life as a cost, right? And then since they play a counterplay, you have something like this And the irony is this card is called Broly Counter Reversal. So it has counter in its name, right? And its auto is once per turn when your opponent activates a counter skill, whether it be counter attack, counter, ironically, right? Which is very useful, right? If your opponent, uh, I'm not going to get into that, but you get the idea. It's like this could be useful if your opponent tries to counter you, right? But you can play this right before you make your big play, especially if you're trying to do some type of overall play, like a mirror creator absorb type of situation, and then your opponent's like, well, they can't deflect, they can't play a counterplay on it because that's deflect, but when you swing, they might try to play a negate, and this will, deal them with damage. And the goal, right, is to deal damage for game. That's how you win, right? Dealing the damage. So if they manage to play a negate, you want the ability to deal them with damage with this. Obviously, combining this with something that can dual attack is very useful because the dual attack already can bypass a negate, right? And then this, so you can always get. What I mean by bypasses, since you always have an extra attack, it doesn't matter. They stop your first attack. You always have an extra one. But then you have this countering, or not counter, but you have this as a deterrent, something that says you don't want to do that, right? No. Basically, that's what a counter is. It's basically saying no to your opponent. It's like, no, you can't do what you want to do. There's some other cards to look into. The idea of what I'm trying to say is look for cards that says when a counter skill is activated, do something. Those types of cards, are very useful in the fact that you can use them as a form of counter because we don't have that many counters in the game. We got what is it, baby, that actually can counter, obviously, like a negate or something. We have baby, golden avengers, baby golden avenger, and then we got swift retaliation cooler. So those are like the main counters out there that people use to like negate, negates, so that way their attack can go through and they can win the game. And your goal is to win the game, or at least get to the point where when you try to go for game, um, you can stop your opponent from trying to stop you, and then you just force them into the combo step, and then from there, hopefully your hand size is bigger, and you can win through that. So something like this would be useful. There's other cards that have this type of effect. From right, there's a 4-drop Jiren that does this. There's a Unison that does this. In case you notice, this doesn't have deflect, so this could get hit by like a Gutsy Trunks or something. So you might want to use because it's relatively the same effect. Is what's his name? Lord Slug Giant Force. It's a 2-drop. You pay 4 to play it, so you can have 4 markers on it, and then it has the auto where you minus 4 markers in order to deal your opponent 1 damage when they play a counter skill. So it's a lot like this card, but it's a Unison, so it'll be immune to counter plays, ironically, right? It'll be immune to your opponent trying to stop you. Let's say they had something that says, negate the skill of all battle cards. So then this card wouldn't be useful in that situation, but the Unison would. So just pointing that out, that's an option. I tend to use that one. I'm definitely going to be revisiting that card. It's been a while since I had it, since I used it, and it does have crit, and it's 15k and all that good stuff. And it does other stuff, but the main thing is the fact of using it like, for your kill turn, and you want to combine it with a leader that untaps 2 energy, ideally, because of course the idea is that you're trying to set up the card, right? So you want to pay 4 to set up the card. Let's say it's turn 4, so you want to play for 4, so that means you're tapped out, but you awaken your leader, so you untap 2 energy, so you have 2 energy to make some type of play, like a mirror creator absorb type of combo, where you pay 1 over round 4, right? Drop the mirror creator absorb, swing with the mirror, right? And then the extra energy Champa, and you should be like 60k or some shit like that, 65k I think it is, right? Because you're 30 base, right? Right, you're 30, add to 20, so you're 50 plus just 60k double strike, swinging your opponent's leader. So your opponent's gonna need like 50k plus combo power to try to out combo that. So if they have a small hand size, that'd be tough. And then of course you have this in play, making it harder for them to try to negate, because they'll take a damage. Even if they don't have a negate that requires them to, let's say, take a life in order to play it. Let's say they have a negate that where they spirit boost. That's a possibility. That's the new type of thing where it's a spirit boost negate. So remove markers from a unison and then play this little battle card counter play, right? So they'll take a damage. They won't take a life, obviously, because they're spirit boosting. So they'll still have one life after the fact, as opposed to the other negates, which will cause them to take a life as a cost, but then they'll take damage, so they'll lose anyway. So it's kind of productive. So either it's a double-edged sword, right? They lose either way, which is ideal. But if they don't negate, obviously we go into the combo phase, and they might get lucky and out combo the attack. But if they don't, they lose, right? But when you go for game, you're more likely going to make sure you're in a more advantageous position, where you have the advantage when it comes to the possibility of having more combo power than your opponent. That's why using stuff like Mirror Create Absorber is nice, because it already inherently will be a strong attacker by default. It would be like a 50k at the least. At the least, it'd be a 50k for one energy, right? So the idea is just to add an extra layer to your win con, right? An extra layer to your kill turn. So this is, something that I'm just putting out there for those who might be interested in this. I want to experiment with this idea. Obviously, consider. Notice I'm only showing one card, but consider having this and the unison, right? If you have the unison in play and then you play this, they both will trigger, right? So right there and then, if they try to do anything, if they try to play a counter play, boom, they're taking 2 damage. One for this card and one for the unison, or for any other card you have that has this effect. So trying to play multiple copies of these types of cards, or cards that are similar, that have these similar effects of dealing your opponent damage, if they play a counter, will drastically reduce the possibility of your opponent playing a counter, because it's going to deal them damage, which is your goal anyway, is to finish them off, right? Sorry. So these ideally have, the potential to either A, make it hard for your opponent to want to negate, so they have to go into the combo step, right? Which ideally should give you the advantage, and you should win in that situation. So it's just something extra that I'm putting out there for those who might be considering it. Some people are probably already doing this already. Good for you. Obviously, you should be thinking ahead of time, right? Being ahead of the game, looking into different possibilities and spice. So this is something that I'm definitely trying to use again, because I haven't played much. Like, I had the idea long ago, I just didn't really use them. I had them in the decks, but I never really used the strategy. But that was the reason why I had them. I had them for that strategy, for the idea of, like, when I go for my kill turn, I want to play these and then go for game, like an overall play or something, and then try to finish my opponent off. And if they try to, do some type of negates, or, sparking negate was a thing at the time. Now we got the barrier blockers. Now we got the spirit boost negates. I guess I'll call them that. The spirit boost negates. So since we have some negates you can play for free, stuff like this will be useful against that stuff, right? And that'll be the end of the video.